It was muted. I don't know why it's muted. I feel like sometimes it like automatically mutes when I switch between scenes. I don't know if it's crazy or not, but you can hear me now, right? Cool. Okay. So I don't even remember what I just said. I was just talking about what we did before. So we got into like basic scripting, and we did some like transform position movements last week. We also had this basic like three-dimensional grid setup with these different tiles that represent different spaces. So if I hit play, then this is where we got, right? We got where the player piece can like navigate around this space. And so part of the task was, so we have, let's see, who said that? I didn't get to do it, but figured out how to do the up and down. So that's good. So if you want to do the up and down, and I'm gonna go ahead and open up our script that we did before right here. And so make this a little bit bigger. We had where we checked if input.getKeyDown, which is a method of the input class, which will return true whenever the key inside of the parentheses is being pressed down. So that's like one time. So in this case, the W key. So if the W key is in a state in which it's being pressed down in that particular frame, it will modify the position. So player transform was something that we used to keep track of the player's position. So transform, like every game object in Unity has a transform. So we can access the position by saying dot position. So because it's a property of transform. And then we can modify it by saying equals itself plus forward. So if I go in Unity to where we attach this script, because attaching it is important. I think someone was saying that they forgot to attach the script. So we can see that in here I've set the forward direction. So directions are stored in things called vector threes. So it stores an X, a Y, and a Z value. So in this case, we made forward 2 positive on the Z because these little spaces are offset by 2 Unity units. And so when we set the movement, we wanted to make sure that when you pressed the W key, it offset that. So like it moved on the Z axis 2 units forward. And so we did that for backward, left, and right. And we can also do it in the up and down as well, or sorry, yeah, up and down. So if I wanted to add those, I could add up and down. I'm just making it, trying to limit it. So we have the forward, backward, left, right, up, and down. So if we wanted to add those directions in here as well, so we might use, if we're going to use keys for up and down, we might use Q and E, because if you're using in the scene view, if you're like navigating this space and you hold down the right click, you can use WASD to move around, and then if you press E, it will move you up, and if you press Q, it will move you down. So if we want to do that, also in our thing, I'm just going to like copy what we did for one of the other directions, and so I'm going to use keycode.q, and this is going to be down. So instead of RGT, which stands for right, I'm going to use DWN, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the E key, and then I'm going to make that one up. So I'm going to save this, Control S on the keyboard or Command S if you're using a Mac. And again, if you have any questions, just throw them in the chat. So now when I go back, Unity, it takes a second to execute everything, make sure there are no errors. If I look down in here, I have to remember to set these values. So you got it. And so if I want to modify like up, down, it's going to be the y-axis. So if I want it to be up, I might make it 2 on the y-axis, and then for down, I might make it -2 for the y-axis. So when I hit play, and this is exactly what we did, but just adding those extra ones. So I can now move in those 4 directions, plus up and down. So one thing is that we can move through the tiles, so we can actually leave the space of the board. So if we wanted to, there are like several different ways we could have it run the game. We could have it run where if you move like off the, if we haven't moved like off the board, it could, one option would be maybe for it to resume on the other side. So like if it went all the way to the left, it would then teleport all the way to the right. So in the example that I showed an example and I shared it in the chat. Let me see if I can find it. So this is like a small game I made as an example for this class. So when you run this, so this one actually, if you try to go off the bounds of the board, it will actually reset your position back to the beginning. So you see how, I'm sorry for that sound, which is awful. It's supposed to be a little bit stressful. So like for instance, so I'm gonna move down to move like against the bottom barrier, and it resets the position back. So that's one way to do it. Like, so if you go with outside of the bounds of the board, then it resets it. You could also have it where it teleports. So like, so there are some games, like I was playing Towerfall the other day, and in Towerfall, if you like walk off one end of the map, then it takes you to the other side. If you fall to the bottom, it takes you to the top, etc. So it's, I don't know, I associate it with like old school games more. So I don't know, what do people think is more interesting? Do you want to either like reset it to the beginning? Do you want to limit it in terms of like make sure it can't leave the board? Or do you want to do something else? What are your ideas? What would you prefer? In the chat. Okay, so Clips said limit it, and my Procast said block it, and then Kaiser said beginning. So I think we're gonna limit it based on 2 out of 3. So we have, let's open up our script again, and I'm just going to make sure that we stay within the limits of our board. So we know what the limits are. I tried to make it so it couldn't leave, failed. That's okay. We're gonna try to do it together. So I haven't done this in a long time, so I'm just gonna improvise. So we have where Oh, this is hard. This is actually a pain in the ass, but we can do it. So right now what we're doing is we're modifying the position directly when you press a key. So one way that we could do this is, instead of directly modifying it, we could store the difference in a way, and we could then check. So like we could store a new position that's like a hypothetical position that we haven't enacted yet. And if that hypothetical position is within the space of the board, then move it. If it's not within the space of the board, then reset it, or not reset it. Don't do anything, don't move it. I don't know if that made sense. So let's try that right now. So right now we're actually modifying this directly, but if we want to, let's say we have, and we store positions using vector3. So inside of update, so each frame, I'm just going to create a new vector3. I'll call it new position. And I'll just give it an initial value of player transform dot position. So it starts off with something. And so instead of setting the player transform position, I'm going to replace that with new position, because regardless of where it's moving, we want to be able to check if that new position is a safe position or not. So I'm just replacing each of those lines with new position. And so now we want to check if the X position of the new position is within the boundaries of our grid. And we want to check the Y position to make sure it's within the boundaries of our grid, and so on and so forth. So we want to check if, so we might have, we could have this with 6 different conditions is one thing. So let's just try it for one direction right now. So we'll check if new position, which will be our new hypothetical position, assuming that it is on the board. So we're checking if it's on the board. So I can actually check just the X if I want to. So I can check if the X is within, if it's like less than our top boundary. So our top boundary here. So if we look at each one of our, we could like select one of the top ones. So on the Y, we know that this is a position of 4. So all the ones on the top are a position of 4, and then all the ones on the bottom are a position of 0. So as long as our position we're coming from is less than 4, then we can move into the new position. So we want to check if, and we might, yeah. So like we're checking if new position.x is less than, and if I want to refer to a vector3 or a position, actually we're just doing the X. So I can say 4, right? So if it's less than 4, that means it's below the top layer. And then the second condition would be new position.x should be greater than what? What was the bottom? Do you remember? The bottom layer is 0. So we want to make sure that, you got it? We want to make sure that it's greater than 0. So we know that it's between the boundaries of those different layers. And so for right now, I'm just going to do this on the X. And so if we want to then modify our player position, so I have player transform dot position equals new position. So that's actually take the position they were temporarily storing and update the player's position to be that one. So like I said, I just improvised this. So let's hope I did it right. Because it's like, you know, like when you're coding something yourself, it's one thing, but when you're like coding it and explaining it, you tend to make mistakes. So let's hope I did it right. So when we go back to Unity, it seems like no errors, which is good. When I hit play, and so I can't move right now because our initial position is actually preventing it from moving. So let me just move it, actually, our player position, so I can start in the middle. Why? So I just moved it to the middle position. And of course it's not working, which is classic improvisation. So if we're not sure what's happening, we need to go back and examine the logic of what's happening. So we have where we're storing this temporary position, and we're only modifying or updating the position if it's within the middle boundaries. So if the x position is less than 4, because that's the top, and the x position is greater than 0. And so in this case, if it's anything besides, if it's 4, for instance, let's say it's in the top layer, then when I run it, and it should, let's see. This is the thing that like you don't want to do when you're teaching a class, is improvise, because then you have to go back and look at what happened. And so I'm gonna go ahead and just add out the rest of the directions, because sometimes that'll help me understand it a little bit better. So one thing I can do is I can just add new lines. So I know this is the x-axis, and so I can add ampersand, ampersand. So this will be additional conditions. So then the next one will be new position. And if anyone has any ideas, just throw them in the chat. .y. So we want to check if y is, and I should make these less than or equal to, greater than or equal to. So then we have for the y, we want to make sure, oh wait, shit. This is supposed to be y. I was checking the y. I'm dumb. So Clip said the x position is ranges 13 to 115. So thank you. I was totally thinking about the y when I did that. So ADHD is like not your best friend. So I'm gonna try it again. So now I can move around, right? And I can move. See, sometimes it's just like the smallest little error will fuck you up. So I can move up and I can move down, but I can't move outside of those boundaries. So I'm gonna go ahead and add it, and thank you for your help, Clips. I'm gonna go ahead and add the rest of those things. So we wanna make sure that it's within these boundaries, and it's also new position dot x is we want to make sure that it's greater than the smallest value on the x. So if we take a look, so this one's 14 on the x, and then the one at the end over here is 0. So we know that it needs to be greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to, yeah, but this is the same idea that it was wrong, right? So so our range on the x is up to 14 and down to 0. So we want to make sure that it's greater than or equal to 0, because that's the one end, and new position dot x is less than or equal to 14. That's what I said, right? 14. And then we want to do the same thing for the z as well. So we want to make sure new position, our new hypothetical position dot x, we want to make sure that it is, or sorry, did I say x? This should be z. Z is, so like if we think about the z, it's this axis, right? So like the smallest the z can be is negative 14, and then the highest is 0. So if we go back here, we want to make sure that it's greater than or equal to negative 14, and it's is less than or equal to 0. So now we have where we're checking the y-axis to make sure it's within the bounds of the y. We're checking the x-axis to make sure it's within the bounds of the x. And we're checking the z to make sure it's within the bounds of the z. A lot of words. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and save this. Control S or Command S. Am I freeze? I'm like, I guess my camera's just going slow right now. So it's gonna go ahead and update this, make sure there are no errors. And now I'm gonna try this. So I can move, but I can't move outside of the bounds of this. So if I wanted, were people able to follow how we did that? Let me know in the chat. I'm actually gonna move the player piece back. That original, what was it? It was 4. Cool. So if we want the camera to follow the piece around, what we can do, and this is very, the way that I did it is very useful if you have something that is like filled in, all the spaces are filled in like this. If you have something in which like the spaces are not filled in, it might be a little bit harder. But for this type of thing, it works well. So one thing, if we want the camera to follow something, remember that if we make something a child of something else, then if that thing moves, it'll move with it. So I could make the camera a child of the player. And let's see how this feels. Maybe it won't be good, maybe it will. So now we can see that it looks like the player piece is staying the same, but we can see that how we're actually like navigating the space. And I think it's a little bit hard to see right now because we have like 3 different layers. So we might also think about like how we can move the camera to a different position, so I can see the preview right here. So maybe I will rotate this and I can switch to the local view so that it's the this axis is pointing in this direction. Maybe this is like a cool angle. I don't know, you tell me. Let's see. So now it might be like too close. So what we can do is we can either move it further out, or we could change the field of view so you can make that wider or narrower. We can also, what we can do is remember that we created a material for this. No, I don't want to become famous, but thank you. I'm very famous in the Ostos game design community. So we created this tile material, right? And we gave it a slightly transparent look. So if I go back to this albedo, I can make it more transparent, which might help. So you can see it's like very faint now. And so that's a little bit easier. And so now that we have, are there any questions about what we did just now with like getting the up and down navigation working and then also limiting it to our board? Okay, cool. So I'm gonna actually save my scene as week 3. So in my scenes folder, I'm gonna call this one week 3. So now we might think about like something that might be a hazard or something that might reset the player's position. So we could also think about maybe we want to have it, I'm trying to think of something interesting to do. My only question is if we have a mod to ban the bot. I mean, I'm a mod, but I mean, I welcome everyone, especially Riley, Mia 2105, world famous bot. So I don't have that many resources, unfortunately. I don't even know. I don't even know how to do that. I'm not a streamer. I'm not a Twitch person. So this is about the extent of the streaming that I do. It's all for you all. Okay. So let's say that we wanted to have a let's say we wanted to have a piece, like, so like I have a tile here, right? Let's say I wanted to duplicate that. So if I select it in the hierarchy view and then I do Control D or Command D, and it will duplicate it, and I'll call this, I'll change the name of it to hazard. And I can give it a different material so it looks different. So we had this castle surface one, so I'm actually going to make a copy of that. So if I select it in my material view and I do Control D or Command D, it'll make a copy. I'll give it a different name, so I'll call this one hazard. And then I can drag it onto my game object so it's red. So yeah, so like make sure you're paying attention to whether this is global or local. So like the local is going to be like a relative position, like a left, right, forward, back, and then global is going to be like north, south. So like Z in the global is always the same Z, X is always the same X. When it's local, it means that it depends on the rotation of the game object. I have like my glass of water and I have like this little like cup topper that prevents my cat from drinking my water. So she cannot get inside because she is thirsty. But she should not drink from my water. Please don't drink from my water. Eclipse tried to use collisions. So if you're trying to do stuff with collisions, it's going to be completely different. So like right now, we're just moving things with, we're just basically teleporting things into new positions. In a few weeks, we will get into like actually using the physics engine. But right now, we're just doing abstract teleportation. So if you want to do stuff with physics and like collisions, then it's a totally different way of approaching it. So you might have trouble if you're doing it that way. Okay, so let's say that now we have our like basic hazard. Maybe we have, I don't know, does that look hazardous to you? It's like red. I'm like, should it be red? Maybe it should be like a sphere or something. What do y'all think? Sphere better? So all I'm doing, I'm changing this mesh in here. So I only have a few different options at this point. So if you're not sure what's happening, don't worry about it. Just imagine that I created a sphere. But I can, for these like very primitive shapes, I can change the mesh to one of these other types if I wanted to by accessing this mesh filter component. So let's see. So that, I think that looks better maybe. It's still hard to see because of our perspective, but that's just the game we're making right now. It's a game that's like not very playable. So your game should be more playable than this one. Okay, so now we want to be able to tell in our script when we've hit that hazard, and I shouldn't say hit as in a collision. I mean, it's like, I guess it's like a red dwarf, maybe? That kind of sun? Is that, are red dwarfs actually red? Is anyone a space person? There's like that movie Sunshine. Red dwarfs are red. Anyone see the show Red Dwarf, the BBC show? I think it's BBC. It's a British comedy show. I like it. It's very dorky. Okay, so we want to be able to tell when our player piece enters the position of a hazard so that we can do something bad. So we want something bad to happen when the player hits that hazard. So in our script, we can create a new, so Kildred has no idea what I'm talking about. So public transform. So I'm going to create a new transform that will that I'm going to assign to this particular hazard. So I'm just going to call this hazard. So I'm going to save this, Control S on my keyboard. I'm going to go back to Unity. And then if I go back to my player, which has the script attached, I can then see that now hazard is listed here. So I can click that, I can click the circle with the dot. I can see a list of all of the game objects in my scene. and then I can find hazard. I can also search if I can't find it, but I found it. So now it's assigned, however, we're not doing anything with it yet, right? So right now we know that this hazard exists. So if we want to do something about this hazard, we could, for instance, let's say we wanted to reset the position to the initial position of the board. What we would need to do is we would need to know what that original position was. So as of right now, we don't know what that is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new transform, or actually I'll create a vector 3 because all we need is the position, right? An X, a Y, and a Z. And we can store a position with that. So I'm going to create a, it doesn't need to be public actually, because I'm not going to manipulate it in the inspector. It's just within the script. So I can create a new vector 3. Vector 3s store an X, a Y, and a Z. And I can call it initial position. Maybe for short, I'll call it init position. So, or maybe for shorter than that even, I'll call it init pose. I feel like I just did the like Vince McMahon meme or something. Okay, so we want to know what the initial position is, so we want to use init pose to store that initial position. So we already have something that keeps track of the player's position, and we know that start runs at the very beginning when our game runs, when it starts to run the scene. So we can capture that initial position using init pose. So I can assign init pose. I can give it the position of player transform dot position. So it will, before the player even has access to anything, init pose will store that initial position. And so now that we have it stored, we can actually check if the player's position is the same as the hazard. If it's the same as the hazard, then we can reset the player to their original position. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Let me know in the chat. All right, so if I want to check those positions, I can compare two positions. So I can check if, let's see, if, what do I call it? I called it player transform. What do you mean by example? Player transform dot position. So I want to check if this position is equal to, I hope this is helping. I don't know what the long way is, but sounds unpleasant based on those tiers. So player transform dot position. So we're checking if it's equal to our hazard dot position. So if it is, then we want to modify the player's position to reset to the initial position, the start position. So if we want to do that, we need to assign player transform dot position equals init position, init pose is what I called it. I forgot, right? That's init pose, I think. To reset the position, I've been writing out the coordinates. So that's, I mean, you can do that, but whenever and I could have used variables here. That would have been probably the better choice. I just didn't want to overwhelm people with too many variables. But for instance, if this changes, if I decide to start the player in a different position, then I would have to go back into the script and change it because it would be hard coded, which is bad because you want it to be as automated as possible. So if you make changes in the editor, your script still works. So like for instance, if I change the like the span of the X of like the board, then I would have to go back into the script and change these manually, which is a pain in the ass. Okay, so I'm gonna save this. I'm gonna cross my fingers that there are no errors and that it works properly. And I assigned my hazard already, so now I'm gonna try moving around and it doesn't work. Of course it doesn't work. Gosh, why do I even try? Wait, did it work? I thought it worked for a second, I was confused. Oh wait. Huh, that's really weird. When I go up in the piece, it resets my position. I'm like, this is in the right position, right? It like looks very much like it's in the right position. So what we can do is let's compare this. So I can look at the player's position is, what is this, 10, 4, negative 12, and I can look at the hazard piece, 10, 4, negative 12, and then I'm like, why isn't this working? And it's a good question. So if we have that question, we always go back to our script and we check this. So what we did here is the order matters. So if we are writing this code, I have where I reset the position of the player piece, but then as long as it was a valid position in terms of the board, it's still updated to that new position. So we have to make sure that the order that we're doing it in works correctly. So I want to move this so that it doesn't just reset it back to its position instantly. So I need to move this so it's after the one below it. So I did set it, so like if you look at the player, I did assign it here, so I assigned it to the hazard. I just did it before. So now let's try it again and let's see if it works. So now notice I cannot go inside of the piece at all. I can go underneath it. If I try to go in it, no good. I go right back to the beginning. So that order really does matter, because in this case it made the difference because it was doing this thing where it was checking to make sure it was a valid position and it was updating it if it was. Does that make sense what happened there? And the thing about teaching is when you're teaching and you like make a mistake or you have an error, you always use it as like a learning experience, and you're like, what happened here? How can we fix this? What did we learn as a result? As a way to pretend like you didn't just make a mistake. But, you know, as long as we can fix it, it is a learning experience. It is like something that we can go through and talk about together to hopefully, hopefully figure out if you have problems that are similar, go back to the code, look it through, and just figure out what's happening line by line and what is the order in which it's happening. So in the problem that we had earlier, I just needed to read the code again because I had, I had X instead of Y in here. I was thinking about the wrong axis. So if I had just read that, then I would have been like, oh wait, no, I'm saying X, but I mean Y. So that's how you could fix that. Okay. So are there any questions about what just happened? I know I just did like a lot of stuff right now. So we might also, like right now, our game is pretty bland. Like it doesn't really have anything going on in it besides the position resetting and the limiting of your position. So one thing that we might want to do is we might want to add some audio in there. So if you are not familiar with BFXR, has anyone heard of BFXR? So BFXR or BFXer is a tool for creating audio, like 8-bit audio. So I use it a lot. So we have bfxr.net. You can also download a desktop application, but for now, there's a Flash version that works. So all the browsers are going to discontinue support, but for now it still works. So for the next few months, it will work in browser. After that, you can just download the desktop application. I'm not going to get into this too much, but like it's a very easy tool for just creating quick sound effects. Like it will generate new ones, and then you can modify the sliders. So let's say that I want, in this case, we want something to, like an audio clip to play whenever we have the player's position reset. So we might have, so it is useful for certain kinds of things. It's not useful for everything. If you have like a more realistic style, it doesn't really work for that. So you can Sorry, it's really loud in my ear. Let's turn this down a little bit. So I think that's a pretty good sound effect for when we want to reset the player's position. So I could modify stuff if I wanted to. I'm not going to right now. And I'm going to export wave, which will save the file to my computer. And then I will locate my, let's see. I'm navigating to my project, which is my repository folder. And then I'm going into my assets. And then I'm going to create a new folder here, and I'm going to call it sounds. And so I can save my wave file inside of there. When I go back to Unity, it will import the sound. If there are any problems with the import, it'll certainly let me know. So I can locate it here. And if you click on it, it will autoplay. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to get this sound to play whenever we hit that hazard. So what we need to do is on my player, I need to add what's called an audio source. So an audio source is basically like a speaker. So something that has an audio source can play sound. So if I selected my player, let me make sure I stop it because it'll reset otherwise. So I select my player. I go to add component and I can type in the search, I can type audio, and then there's the option for audio source. So when I hit audio source, you can see in the scene view, it adds a little speaker icon. And so now that I have my audio source, it's capable of playing audio. So nothing will happen by default if there's no audio clip in there. So if I go back to my script, I want there to be, I need a way to, so there are audio sources, those are like speakers, and then there are audio clips, which are files that contain actual audio. So an audio source plays an audio clip. So it's a bit like, like a file that you play. And so if I want to be able to assign an audio clip in here, I can make a public, it's called audio clip. So capital A, capital C. And I'll call this death clip. So I'll call it death clip because we want it to play whenever the player's position resets. I might also create an audio source. So all the things that are components, those are all scripts somewhere. And so they're all classes that exist. So when I create audio clip, it's here. I can also create audio source. And I could call this like speaker. And so if I make it public, I can assign it in the inspector. If I do not make it public, one thing I can do is I can inside of my, so this does not have an assignment by default. So remember how with init pose, we gave it an assignment inside of start. We can do the same thing with audio source. So I can create an assignment in here. So I know that this audio source is going to be the one that's attached to the same game object as our script. So what I can do is I can say speaker equals, there's a thing called get component. So if I write that get component, and then it's written in a weird way. So I do like the less than, greater than, open and close parentheses. So what this will do is it will assign this to a specific component that's attached to the same game object. So I just have to put the name of the component inside of the less than, greater than. So, excuse me, I'm like, again, talking too much. Okay. So audio source is the type of thing. So what this will do is it will create a new audio source called speaker in our script. And then when the game begins, the very first step, it will assign it to be the component of the type audio source that's attached to the same game object as our script. So our grid movement is attached to this one, and then the audio source, so it will know which audio source we're talking about. I hope that makes sense. And then another thing we have to do is we need to assign the audio clip here. So if I hit the circle with the dot here, I can see a list of all of the audio sources, or sorry, audio clips. It's confusing because they're both audio, but a clip is like a file and an audio source is like a player. So I can select my audio clip, Explosion 28, it plays it. And now going back to our script, we've assigned our audio source, which was called speaker. And so we want to, what we can do is when we reset the player's position, we also want to play that sound. So if you want to play a clip, you can access an audio source. So our audio source is called speaker. And then if I do dot, if you're using Visual Studio or something and use dot, you should see a list of all of the possible methods or functions of the class audio source. So all the types of things that an audio source can do. And so if you didn't know or it doesn't pop up, you can always go to the reference page and you can look it up. So anytime you want to do that, you can do like, let's say audio play one shot. Sorry, I meant to search for audio source. But it would take you to this audio source page. And like I said, anytime you want to find out anything with scripting in Unity, you just Google it and then it'll come up. So we have audio source. You can find out what kinds of things can I do with an audio source. I'm glad. I can't fucking speak today. Oh my god. I'm glad that cleared it up. So these are like, if you imagine like an old like 80s boombox, like what kind of buttons does it have on it? What can it do? So I can look through here and I can see there's something called play one shot, which if you don't know what it is, it might be hard to find. But then I can see an example of how play one shot works. So I can see in this example, they create an audio source. They call it audio source as well, which I think is a little bit confusing. They assigned it the same way that we did. And then they used the name of the audio source, dot play one shot. And then inside the parentheses, the first parameter, the first argument was the name of the clip. So in this case, they're using one called impact. Ours is called death clip. And then the second parameter is the volume at which to play it. So it will tell you up here at the top. So it will show you the first one is an audio clip, and the second one is a volume scale. So the first one is type audio clip, the second one is type float. So I can do speaker dot play one shot, and then open parentheses, and I can do the name of the audio clip, which is death clip. So what do you mean by 05? And then the second thing is the volume at which to play it. It's like a pretty abrasive sound, so I might want to play it at like 0.6 or something. And in Unity, when you're specifying a float, or in C# in general, this also is true in Java, you might want to add the F on the end sometimes as a habit, because some weird stuff will happen if you don't, when you're specifying a whole number. So it's a good habit to be in. Whenever you're using a float or specifying a float, you just add the letter F on the end and it will make sure that it is treated as a float. Okay, so we have our speaker. So like, not only will the position reset for the player, but also it will reach into the speaker. It'll basically like pop the death clip in and it will play it one time. So play one shot just plays it once. So, and this is once, this is not twice. I don't know why I did this. Okay. I think I saved. I hope I saved. Okay, so no errors, thank God. And so I'm just gonna try this. Okay, so did you hear that? I'm gonna do it again. Do you hear the audio clip playing? So, and that particular clip has like a little bit of like lead, maybe like it has like a little bit of time in between. So that's the kind of thing that, like, you know, maybe you want to tweak it or something. It just like gets louder like toward this area. So it's just something to consider when you're like playing different audio clips, as far as like making sure if it's like a sound effect, making sure it feels right. But for our purposes, it's totally fine. So yeah, now we have a basic audio source. So we have, how are people feeling? Were you able to understand all of that? I just did a lot of stuff. So I hope it made sense. Cool. So let's see. Let's say we wanted to have like a whole bunch of hazards. Let's see, can I do this in 14 minutes? I think so. Let's say we wanted to have a whole bunch of hazards. So if we wanted to have, like, let's say we wanted to have a list, hazard 1, hazard 2, hazard 3. What might be a good thing in code to use to store a whole bunch of them rather than just one? So a whole bunch of the same type of thing. What might be a good thing? Let me know in the chat. An array, thank you. An array. Okay, so if I want to create an array in Unity, so like we did this one hazard as an example. So I'm just gonna add a comment on here, single hazard example. But let's say we have like 50 hazards. It's gonna be a pain in the ass to do this for each one of those hazards. So what we can do is we can create a public transform. And if we want to make it an array of transforms, we just add the square brackets, open and close square bracket, and I can give it a name. I'll call it hazards, plural. And then now if I save this, Control S on the keyboard, or Command S if you're on a Mac, and I go back to Unity, it will compile it. And then I can go to where I have the script attached. And if I scroll down to here, under hazard, I see hazards, and it has a little like triangle, like an arrow that you can expand it down. And if you expand it down, it gives you the option for size. And by the way, I always forget that my head occupies the bottom corner of the screen, so just let me know if I'm like blocking it and I'll like move out of the way or whatever. But I just don't remember. Okay, so let's say that we have our single hazard. So if I can search in here, hazard. Let's say I wanted to duplicate it, and then I could move it to like be right next to it, and then I could duplicate that one to be another hazard, and instead of 8 I can make it like 6. So now we have like 3 different hazards, right? So if I go to my back to my where I have the script attached, I can make this 3. So if I just write the number 3, it will populate with 3 different options. So that's like a really cool thing you can do, where it will automatically make it whatever size you want. So you don't have to actually specify when you create it in the script. You can specify in the inspector, which is really nice. So if I want to assign these, I could just, one way I could do this is I could just like drag my hazards into there. So hazard 0, hazard 1, hazard 2. And remember that arrays start with an index of 0. And so I have these assigned, which is great. I'm going to save my scene because I haven't saved it in a while. Control S, Command S on a Mac. And so now if I want to do this, I had previously checked if the player's position was the same as the single hazard's position. So what kind of thing in code could I use to check if the player's position is the same as each position in an array? What might I use? Like, what tool is at my disposal that will help me do something many times? I also feel like I end up losing my voice from blasting the AC because I get nervous and I get sweaty, so I turn it up. But then my throat dries out. So my procast said a loop, and that's exactly what I was thinking about. So I was thinking about a for loop. There are other loops you could use, but we're just going to use a for loop. So we could use a while loop, but I'm not going to. So if we're writing a for loop, I'm going to write for, and then I'm going to create a new integer called I. I'll give it an initial value of 0. So that's the first thing inside the parentheses. The second thing is a rule for, so like I would need to be less than the number of positions within the array. So if I want to refer to the number of positions in the array, I have to refer first to the array name. So the array name is hazards dot, I think it's length. I always get these mixed up between Java and C#. I think that's right. So long as I is less than that amount, it will run the loop again. And then the last thing is an update, something that's going to modify the value of I each time. So I will start off at 0, and then it will increase by 1 position. And then so long as it's less than hazards.length, the number of hazards within the number of elements within hazards, then it will run again. So in here, we want to check if, like the same way we did here. So I can actually just copy this. I can copy all these and then I'll modify it. So we want to make sure my indents are good. So instead of checking for the single hazard position, we want to check for the specific element based on I. So if I want to indicate a position within an array, so I'm going to change this to hazards because it's plural hazards, and then I use square brackets to indicate what the index is. So inside of there, I'll use I. So what's going to happen is it runs through the loop. I is 0, so that's going to check if the player's position is the same as index 0, and then regardless of what happens, it's going to then increase I and start over again. So I is going to be 1, so it's going to check the position, the second one, which is 1, because it starts at 0. So the second element, is it the same position as the player? And then the third one, so on, however many there are. So I'm going to save this, Control S or Command S on a Mac. I'm going to pray that it works, and no, of course it doesn't work because I have an error. So you know what's going to happen eventually. So if I look inside my console here, I can see that there's an error on line 76, comma 7. So, oops. So I can see that there's an error with this if statement. So something happened where I basically copied one too many, or I created an extra one. I thought I didn't copy it, so I have one too many closing curly brackets. So I have this one closes out my if statement, this one closes out my for loop, and I think that should be good. So I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to go back, and then be gone. Okay, cool. And so now let's go ahead and try it. So I'm going to hit play. So the first one works. It worked before, so it's not a surprise. And then the second one also works. And then the third one also works as well. So that's like an easier way to get all of these going without having to, and there are even easier ways to do it than this, or smarter ways, I should say, that will automate the process. It's just like a little bit too much right now for if you're new to Unity. So we could have, for instance, if I wanted to, I could create, instead of naming these hazard, I could give them a tag, and then I could have something which would search through all the game objects in the hierarchy, find all the ones with the tag hazard, and then it would just automatically populate into that array. I could do that. And we'll probably do something like that in a few weeks probably, but we're just trying to keep it light right now. But there's always a better way to do it. There's always a more efficient way, a smarter way. So we're starting off simple, if you start in processing, we don't talk about variables until the second week. And so you have to learn the basics before you can start to get smarter, and then easier, and then lazier, meaning you code less for more functionality. Because if you're a lazy coder that gets things done, that makes things work, then that's good, that's ideal. And I do this is the OK symbol. This is not the internet. at all. I mean, I'm sorry, you can't tell what I mean. Like, it's just a habit from childhood. I'm sorry. I've been trying to wipe that one from my my digital vocabulary. Digital because fingers are digits. Okay, enough rambling. So, do people understand what we just did together? How we got this array working? See, if like there's not much chat happening, then I'm just like going into my head, and like that's not good. So I hope it makes sense. So my procast got it. Nice. So I'm just gonna give nice array of hazards. So now we have all this stuff, and so we've added a lot of functionality today to our game. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna save this because I just added a comment, I guess. And don't worry if you didn't get all of this. I'm going to show you where you can get it. So I've saved it. I want to go back to Unity, and I want to make sure that I save my scene. So I'm going to go to File, Save. So it'll save the scene. And then now that let's say I'm done for the day. So I want to make sure that my repository is up to date, so I can like create like a snapshot of everything we've done today. So when I open up GitHub Desktop, I can see a list of all of the things that were modified or added or removed. So I can see things like, I can see week 3 is a new scene that was added. I can see that our grid movement script was modified. So I can see that lines 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 were added. I can see that, let's see, line 12 was removed and it was replaced by what becomes line 17. So I added the up, down, etc. So it's like a full history of all the changes since the last commit. So I'm going to add a summary. So I'm going to call it week 3 content added. And then I'm going to hit commit to master. And until I push it to the server, it's just local. So like I have like that, basically that save state locally in the folder, but it's not on the server. So I need to make sure that I hit push origin, which will send it to the server. And then when it's done, anyone will have access to it. So now if I hit open the repository on GitHub in your browser, then I can see all of the changes in there. And if you want to find the script that we just did together, you can go to assets, you can go to scripts, you can go to grid movement, and you can see all of the stuff we did today. Another way you could do it is if you wanted, you could actually clone this repository yourself. So you could clone it by, let's see. So you can also clone something that's like not yours if you go to the URL. So you could take, if you go here, there's like an option with the URL for cloning. So I just clicked on this code thing, and you could take this URL, you could put it in here, and you could clone it on your own computer. So you can open the entire project on your own computer if you wanted to. And so each week it'll be updated. You could then just pull changes from the server if you wanted to. You can also use this download zip function, but I wouldn't recommend that for anything that you're going to manipulate with code. If you're just going to download something as a one-off, then it's useful, but it's not. There's also a link here, open with GitHub Desktop, which I think will like literally open it. So that might even be easier than copying and pasting the URL. Okay, so it's 4:44. I don't know why I just did like the clap thing, like where it's, you know, like the Twitter clap. Like I said, going into my head, meme world. Okay, so yeah, hopefully you were able to follow through with what we did today. And for those of you that are in the class, I'll post on River what you have to do, and it's an extension of what I already posted. So Clips asks, what's that thing called that you have on your cup? I don't know what it's called. You know, my old roommate, she bought it in Korea. So I don't know what it's called. It's like a cup topper or something. I don't know. You can like get a little bit of suction in there, which is nice. Do you have any cats or pets? might drink from your water. Also, like I have these like, we have like a plant over here with like basil, and there are all these like little gnat things flying around, and I don't want them in my water either. But yeah. Cool. So I mean, I'm sure there are like other things. I don't know what the name is, but I think if you just Google like cup, top, cat, you'll probably find it. Okay, so that's all for today. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and I will see you next week. Goodbye.